Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, New York Times D.C. correspondent covering the Justice Department Glenn Thrush, and staff writer for The Atlantic and MSNBC political contributor Mark Leibovich. Glenn, this is your neck of the woods. Was that a surprising turn of events today?
Well, it wasn't a surprising turn of events, but you got to wonder what hearing prep looked like for Ms. Bondi, who spent most of last week working on that. She certainly wasn't going through briefing books to provide answers. These hearings are political theater. They always have been. But there has, at least in the past, been a fundamental respect for the process, which is if you're not going to provide answers, you say why, you provide your excuses, and she did copiously, saying she couldn't talk about ongoing investigations and whatnot. But this was totally different and really reflected what I saw as a strategy that first evidenced itself during the 2015 debate season, where Donald Trump would simply bulldoze any of his debate partners or moderators who asked him a question he didn't want to answer and go straight on to personal attacks. I mean, when she was asked, Blumenthal asked her an informational question, and her response was to attack him on his lie from 15 years ago about his military service. She questioned Schiff's bona fides as a lawyer. She went after Dick Durbin, the Democrat on the committee, and questioned
connection issue.
Billions
Yeah.
And, she just went after him.
Yeah, it questioned his love for Chicago. Also questioned the money that he got from the Epstein associate for campaigning. Lisa, remind us again why these oversight hearings exist. I mean, Glenn said they've always been political theater, and that is true to a degree. But why are these officials having to sit in the first place in front of Senate panels?
Well, I think part of it, Katie, is that these departments are creations of Congress. And so in the same way that they owe their annual budgets largely to the congressional budget process and the appropriations process, so too do different committees have jurisdiction of oversight. And therefore, the Attorney General has frequently appeared before Senate Judiciary and the House Judiciary Committee to talk about things that are within the oversight purview of that committee, and theoretically, which they could change through legislation if they chose to. That, of course, is somewhat farcical here because this is not a Congress on either side of the Capitol that's much interested in legislating. But if they were, these are supposed to be the sort of illuminating discussions about the functions of the department that would allow the Senate or House Judiciary Committees to get together and think about what, if any, authorization-related changes need to be made.
Yeah, and usually, even in times of contentious periods in our politics, usually you'll see some bipartisanship on certain questions or needing answers on certain questions. It's been less so, obviously, since 2015, as Glenn was just remarking on. But there was a moment today where a Republican pressed the Attorney General on the deployment of the National Guard. Here's Thom Tillis of North Carolina asking about it.
Seeing what's happening in Chicago, they need the National Guard. Our ICE members need the National Guard to protect the national buildings.
Oh, 100%. I'm talking about when it wades into local law enforcement. See, I felt like deployment in D.C. made sense because of the hybrid nature of D.C. What I'm saying is outside of that defending federal buildings and federal law enforcement, addressing, I think you mentioned over 500 murders in Chicago, it would just seem to me that all those bums should be thrown out in an election. And are we masking an underlying problem that will come back the minute we leave? That's what I'm talking about. Not the protection of federal buildings and federal law enforcement officers, but almost the sense of they become an arm of local law enforcement. I don't consider that a best practice. It doesn't sound like you do either.
Well, I don't believe our National Guard want to be doing that, but they're going to be where they have to be to keep Americans safe.
Listen, it was a timid question, but certainly one moment of pushback. Mark, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, Tom Tillis is not running for re-election next year, so I guess that's a version of the unleashed Tom Tillis asking questions at a hearing. I mean, look, I mean, he clearly, as a jurisdictional matter, I mean, he sort of pretended that was what his concern was here. I mean, but he was obviously fully on board with the underlying principle of the National Guard being called into Chicago, and obviously, you know, it's not going to probably cause him that much grief. And I think to Glenn's point earlier, I mean, obviously, it's absurd to think that Pam Bondi spent any time in a briefing book, any time sort of looking over legal briefs about this in anticipation of this hearing. I mean, these are combat hearings. These are combat training hearings. And I think obviously the expectation is, and certainly on both sides, obviously the Senate and the senators involved here know that there's going to be a lot of back and forth in a pretty hostile way. So they're preparing also. But I think to this degree, I think Schiff was probably more effective than maybe others were, just because he was just so prosecutorial and he just really commanded the exchange, and Pam Bondi didn't really get a word in edgewise. But I do think it also gives you a window into why Schiff probably gets under the skin of Donald Trump, and it looked like Pam Bondi from her facial expressions here.
Glenn, is there concern about the Justice Department being weaponized among anyone over there beyond Democrats?
That's one of the subtexts of this entire hearing, is essentially that you do hear privately among Republicans some concerns about where this is all headed. Grassley himself, I am told, questioned the forced resignation, rather, of the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia last week. They just don't want to talk about it publicly. They want to keep their talking points together. And frankly, that just creates an environment where it just seems like it's Democrats against Bondi rather than people making valid points and raising significant questions about the conduct of the department. It just makes it seem like it's a partisan mud fight to most Americans who really aren't as tuned into this as we are.
All right. Mark Leibovich, I like the pillow placement behind you. Thank you very much for that. Made me laugh. Pow. Glenn Thrush, yeah. Thank you as well.